Stacey. Now I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. He is an organiser for the International Socialist Group in Scotland, socialist activist, anti-cuts and anti-war campaigner. Jonathan.
Okay, I want to just start, I think, with the capitalist crisis, because this isn't just a crisis of finance. It's not just that there are some banks which are in trouble. This is a crisis of the system itself. This is capitalism in its late phase, capitalism in decay. And it's not just that it affects the poorer states in the world. This is affecting the world's most powerful nation states, the world's most powerful economies. Look at the United States, for example. It's not just that millions don't have healthcare, it's that now hundreds of thousands of people who did have houses 6 or 7 months ago now don't, and now have to sleep in their cars. It's not just that people don't have the accessibility that they need to education, it's also that their communities are being torn and ripped apart in huge sections of American cities because of the economic crisis. And what's important about that is to say that the global crisis is percolating through almost every aspect of our lives. Again, just to reiterate, this is a crisis which isn't just of the financial institutions, it's of the operation of the capitalist system itself. Look at Spain, for example, has one of the best regulated, economies in terms of its banks and financial institutions, and yet is one of the hardest hit in terms of the economic crisis. But this isn't just a crisis which leads to poverty. It's not just a system, a way of operating which is about millions of people not having access to healthcare or food or whatever it might be. This is also fundamentally a question about democracy. I've come down from Glasgow today, and at the last election, the lowest turnouts for votes happened to coincide with 3 wards in Glasgow, and they happened to coincide with the 3 poorest wards in the whole of the UK. There are millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people across this country who are literally locked out of the system. They are locked out of any sort of sense of them having any control over their own lives, any sort of sense of them having any real say in the formal political boundaries. The London riots, again, exemplified this, it illustrated there's a whole generation of people who are simply locked out of the system. They have no stake in the system, they have no stake in society as a whole. And so it's not surprising then that people are looking towards alternatives, that people are actually starting to think about capitalism, about an alternative, about what communism is, about what these ideas mean to people today, and are they abstract ideas or are they something actually which are possibilities to actually build a better society. It's not like, therefore, the post-war boom, where actually the ruling class could sell capitalism as, look at your living standards increasing, all these sorts of things. This is actually now in a situation where even the ruling class are struggling to sell the system. The system is being exposed for what it is. It's not just that people are angry about the bailout of the banks, it's also that people are beginning to understand that it does not make sense that to get a train from Glasgow to London costs more than to get a plane from Glasgow to France. It doesn't make sense that every week, that every day in fact, a ship full of grain is floated out from the United States, dumped in the sea. Why? Because it's overproduced and therefore it doesn't make profit. These are irrationalities which are the heart of the system itself. And therefore it's not insane, it's not mad, it's not anything but a good sense method to start thinking about what the alternatives might be. You might hear on the TV, you see these people, well, don't be so ridiculous. How can you have an alternative to capitalism? Look, we have problems in this system, but at the end of the day there's nothing better. Well, actually I think there is something better. We can do better than this, and therefore communism actually is a fairly simple idea. It's not actually hugely complex. So let's just talk about some of the issues here. One of the problems with communism, with Marxism, with the word socialism, is that they're attached now to a dogma for a whole series of reasons, partly historical, partly to do with the left, how the left relates to people, everyday people in communities or in movements or any of these sorts of things. We have to recover, to reclaim Marxism as a method, as a tool for action, as a way of understanding the world, which is not just simply, as Marx says, to interpret, to philosophise, but actually to think about how you change it. And what we have to say, just when we start the discussion about communism, is this. The economic crisis, really, if you boil it down, is a situation in which the relations of production are in contradiction. In other words, the products that are being made, there are being made too many of them. They are not being bought back by the workers in enough quantity who make them in the first place. a contradiction within the system, therefore, is being exposed for many people to see. In other words, what you have is what despotism really in the workplace. You have a highly centralistic, highly bureaucratic operation inside the workplace, but at the same time you have absolute anarchy in the marketplace. There is no planning, there's no thought as to how you actually organise society. So the first idea about communism, I think, is one that's connected with democracy, but which is a very simple idea. That is, you have resources in a world, you have resources in a planet, why can't we commonly own these resources and work out together how we might produce things and what we're producing them for and who's producing them and why we need them? The very simple idea. I mean, if you came down to a planet, let's imagine that this planet's not populated, you suddenly find 60 or 6 billion people and you drop them on a planet and you've got all these resources. I don't actually think many people at that point in time would say, okay, well, these tiny number of people here, you're going to go and you're going to own this bit of land, you're going to own these resources, and you're going to get the rest of the people to work on those resources, to produce those products, and then you're going to get those same people to buy them back, the very same people that made them in the first place. It's a completely irrational sort of system. What we have to say then about planning is a couple of things. Planning is simple. It means that we use resources in a way which is not geared towards profit, which is not geared towards the accumulation of profit, not just because, you know, greed is bad or any of these things. Greed, in my view, is a bad thing, but actually because what we're talking about here is the system, the capitalist system. It needs to accumulate. It's locked into the operation of the system. It must accumulate. Everything else is an externality. The environment, the human labour, culture, all of these things are an externality. And what we say about communism, in that sense, is that planning allows not just for a distribution of resources which makes sense, it actually allows a democratic society to actually emerge. Because what's more democratic than everyone in the world actually deciding what happens with our world's resources? What's more undemocratic than what we currently have? See, democracy can't just be within the location or within the realm of who you vote for once every 4 or 5 years. It has to also be about what say do you have in how your life is run. Why is it that millions of people every day, they wake up and they look at their watch and they think, right, now time off to work, I get the tube and they go into work and I work all day and I hate my work, I like my workmates, some of them anyway, but actually this is not what I want to be doing with my life. Why can't we have a situation where actually work is something which is enjoyable? I mean, for Marx this was absolutely fundamental. The question of alienation was absolutely fundamental to what Marx was talking about. Because what he understood was that there is something very simple about humanity, and that is that we have to interact with our environment. It does, you know, whatever method you use, you have to interact with it, you have to produce, you have to manufacture goods and so on and so forth to improve your standard of living. And why can't we do it in a way which I've described, which involves planning? One last example just on the question of planning. I was thinking the other day, how many people is there in Britain? Let's say 60 million. How many of those people, whether in work or not, how many of those people can actually go out and work, can go out and labour? I don't know what the answer is, but let's just say it's something like 10 million. It may be more. Let's just say 10 million for ease of figures. 10 million. If they only worked 5 hours a week, that gives you 50 million hours worth of labour every single week, and you're only working 5 hours. What can you do with 50 million hours of labour? Well, it's a big task to organise, I don't deny that. But it points out to something which is, to be honest, fairly relevant for what we're talking about in terms of the cuts. I mean, why is it that we have both a crisis of unemployment but also a crisis of homes? We have a crisis of unemployment, but we also have a crisis in terms of the environment. Why can't we put to build renewable energy? Why can't we get the priorities in that format? And the reason is that it doesn't suit the needs, it doesn't suit the demands of profit and of the system. So planning is one element to what we're talking about here. But the other thing that people say is they say, well, you know, communism, yes, but I would rather have an unequal society where at least I'm free. I would rather that, yes, there are some people in poverty and so on and so forth, and yes, I'm not that rich, but, you know, at least I'm free, at least I have my individual rights. Well, let's talk about individual rights, because, to be honest with you, I think loads of people in Britain would turn around to you and say, well, actually, if I actually thought about this in a way which was good sense, and not just common sense, but which was good sense, you would look around and you would say, well, actually, what actual rights do I have over how I operate in my life? You have the right to buy Pepsi or Coke. You have the right to watch, you know, this football club or that football club. It does, you know, these are not real choices which we are actually being given here. And therefore, freedom, leisure time, individuality, innovation, all of these things actually are more coherent with the idea of communism than they are of the idea of capitalism. Look at Windows 95, look at Windows 2001, Microsoft I'm talking about. We're in 2012. I'm willing to bet that they have the technology for 2020, Windows 2020. They won't release it though. Why? Because they need to make money. They need to make money. How is this capitalism innovating? How is this capitalism unleashing its power in terms of innovation and of products and all these sorts of things? The reality is, how much more of an innovative society would we have if all of our potential was unlocked? If every single person had the opportunity, if every single person was encouraged to actually live up to the potential, but more than that, how much innovation would we have if we were not locked in call centres, locked in building council buildings and all these sorts of things, but actually if we were doing jobs, but we had more time to spend thinking about art, culture, theatre, all of these sorts of things. Very last point about this is oppression. Because in capitalist society, you cannot get away from this. You will have racism, you will have sexism, you will have imperialism, all of these absolutely locked into the system. Imagine a society where you don't need people to be divided on the basis of colour, or basis of sex, the basis of sexual orientation, or whether you're Iraqi or whether you're British. Imagine a society, therefore, where actually people are coming together to work out how they use resources in a common and democratic way. Communism is a simple idea. The problem is that ideas don't exist in a vacuum, and this is where I just want to come into my concluding comments. Where do ideas come from? Because we can't just have a discussion. What is communism? It's a good discussion to have, but we also have to seriously discuss where do ideas actually come from. And I heard someone put it like this, and I think this is a good way of looking at it. In capitalist society, you have two things going on at the same time, both in contradiction. On the one hand, you have the ideas of the ruling class being the dominant ones. Why? Because they own the media, they own the production of ideas and so on and so forth. So the ideas in workers' heads are the ideas of the ruling class. The other thing though that we say, and I think most people in this room would agree, is that the only people that can actually transform society, the only people that can emancipate themselves are workers themselves. But isn't this contradiction? Because how can you emancipate yourself, how can you rise up if the ideas inside your head are the ideas of the ruling class? And this is why we have to talk about struggle. This is why we have to talk about how we change people's ideas. Now, the ruling class, the ideas of the ruling class are fixed in terms of the strength of the ruling class and the power block and the hegemonic block that they can actually create over a particular idea. Look at the post-war boom, for example. You were able to create a hegemonic block with the question of the system. Look at the cuts today. You're able to create a hegemonic block with the question of cuts. So you have millions of people who are opposed to the Tories, but the same millions of people actually believe you need some cuts. So this is a contradiction. And the reason the contradiction is because the ruling class are able to essentially build a hegemonic bloc. And what we have to think about is, how do we universalise, and I use the word universalise, the interests of the working class across the whole of society? This is what Gramsci talks about. How do you universalise these ideas? And I want to just give just a couple of examples here. And it may seem bizarre, but I'm going to say it is a festival of dangerous ideas. Let's look at Fireman Sam. Let's look at Postman Pat. Now, think about this for a second. They're public sector workers, right? And why are they public sector workers? Fireman Sam's a hero next door, right? Postman Pat, he's not just a postman, he helps everyone out in his local community. And why is this taking place at that point in time? Well, it's quite simple. It's because of the rising working class struggle. And let's look at Bob the Builder. What's Bob the Builder? He's a petty bourgeois, and he is self-employed, right? And that's because of neoliberalism. Let's look at The Simpsons. One thing about The Simpsons, working class family. Second thing about The Simpsons, actually, they struggle. They struggle against the owner of the nuclear plant. The Simpsons actually, there's something to say about the ending of the episodes, but actually something quite good. Look at Family Guy though. On the other hand, Family Guy is a completely hopeless situation. You know, it's completely immoral, it's completely without any sort of sense of moving forward. It's stuck in a capitalist crisis. And in other words, ideas are not just simply things which we talk about in meetings or so on and so forth. Ideas are actually taking place all over society all the time. And ideas are something we need to be thinking about how we engage in. And therefore, struggle is the important thing here. You can talk to people on an individual basis. You can put on day schools, you can sell publications, you can do all of these things. And these are good things to do, because you will convince some people, and you convince some people to join an organisation, build a movement, coalition of resistance, or stop the war, whatever it might be. But what's important here is a question of struggle. It's only through struggle that people actually start to change their ideas. I mean, look at the Egyptian Revolution. We're talking about a society here who has thrown off a whole range of prejudice, a whole range of divisions, which have been completely thrown off. Women are to the fore. You have Christians defending Muslims. you have a situation in which workers are starting to think not just about how they win democracy in terms of who they elect and so on and so forth, they're starting to think about democracy in their own workplace. And that's the fundamental point. And this is it. Transforming society is easy. It's easy because we are the people who already run society. The problem is, we run society only in the benefit of the rich. We run society only in the benefit of those in the ruling class, those in the state, those who own the means of production. If you want to find out who runs the rich mix, well, I know who I'd speak to. I'd speak to the people who are probably standing about downstairs inviting people in. If you want to talk about the trains, as Faisy pointed out, I mean, like yesterday I was on a train down, absolutely crammed, you know, all sorts of problems with reservations, all these sorts of things. I'm not going to phone up Richard Branson and say, excuse me Richard, I don't know what's going on with this train, can you please tell me how this train is working and so on and so forth. Well, you just don't do it. What you do is you speak to the conductor. The point is we run society already. The problem is that we run society in a way which benefits only the ruling class, and the ruling class dominate us. So how on earth is this a ridiculous idea? David Starkey will tell you. You say to David Starkey, you know, that's the thing, you say to him, you know, actually there's something wrong here. He goes, oh, don't be so absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing wrong here at all, because really there's no alternative. It's this famous thing about Tina, Margaret Thatcher talked about it all the time. Actually, I want to say and end on this. It's not just that there is an alternative. It's not just that we need an alternative. It's actually this. It's actually that the idea of communism is perfectly simple. And it's the ideas of the ruling class in which we have to talk about ideas, we have to talk about struggle, they're actually clouding our judgment here. They are clouding the way people think about things. We have to reclaim Marxism. We have to reclaim socialism. We have to reclaim these ideas. We have to reclaim organisation and working class organisation. We have to rebuild working class solidarity. It's through that sort of struggle that you can actually think about changing the world. Very last thing I want to say. Some people might have heard this before, but I do want to just say it. There was an occupation in Dundee a couple of years ago, and it was 15 workers, and they were brought into the work, and the boss says, okay, you're off, you're sacked, and there's no redundancy pay, and guess what, there's no notice, so just go away. And they decided they would occupy their factory. Now, basically, all they did was, in their factory, was they were making cardboard boxes. They were in there for 50 days. After about the 15th or 16th day, they decided to start production. They started production because they started to realise, actually, we don't need the boss. They started production. Now, you could go to those workers and you could say, 2 weeks before they lost their jobs, you could say, do you know what? You should take over your factory. You don't need your boss. Go and run your factory by yourself. Get rid of your boss. They would turn around and say, are you completely mad? You're absolutely mad. 2 weeks later, they get sacked. 15 days after that, then they run their own factory. They run their own factory without their boss. So let's be clear about what we're saying here. We have to be talking about struggle, we have to be talking about ideas, and we have to actually be putting to bed the notion that communism is some old dogma which is about Stalin and so on and so forth. Actually, it's something vital, necessary, and something which can emancipate humankind.
Okay, I'm going to open up for contributions and questions. If you want to indicate by raising your hand, and I'll call you forward. Just remind you, it's 3 minutes maximum.
Yeah.
One, two. If you'll come up to the front, I'll hand you a mic, and then you can speak.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you hear me? Yeah, a couple of questions, both to one speaker on that, if I may. You say the Egyptian Revolution, but the elections afterwards were the Islamist parties dominated. The socialist element was very small in the Egyptian Revolution. Are we being a bit naive to assume that because it's a revolution, this could turn out in the way we want it? And also, another point rising from that, in this country, the right is much stronger than the left. You didn't mention the opposition to revolutionary ideas which are taking place in the working class, such as the English Defence League. There's no left-wing equivalent to that, I don't think. And getting back to your point, I share some of your aspirations, but I think the vision you have, would it involve some deindustrialisation? Because when you have a complex industrial society, you're bound to get hierarchies and specialisms forming. Now, I don't want to hog the platform. There's a couple of questions going on with it.
Yeah, I want to say, how do we go from where we are now to the future society? Because otherwise I think it can become, we're just talking about a sort of vision in the abstract of what a communist society, a social society might look like. And I think the answer was posed by an Italian Marxist, Antonio Gramsci, who said that it's working class struggle and the creation of working class democracy, grassroots democracy, which creates the bridge from where we are now to the future. And what he meant by that is every great working class struggle, every great struggle actually, throws up new forms of democracy. In his case, he was talking about the factory councils in Italy in 1919. But you could talk about Soviets, the Commune, every struggle you want to talk about. Spain, 1936, Hungary, 56, Iran, 1979. You go through a litany of it. And I think the important thing at the moment is that we are beginning to see the re-emergence of that in embryo. And where it starts from is actually about the erosion of democracy inside the society now. The fact that neoliberalism is eroding democracy means that in every issue, the question of democracy is posed fundamentally. And I think sometimes the left doesn't quite get it and just simply talks about strikes and social unrest and all the rest of it. And of course they should. If you look at Egypt, strikes are important, demonstrations are important, but democracy is important, and you have to merge the two things together. Right? That's really the trick here in terms of it. And I think you saw it, and it's very much an embryo, but I think you saw it as well a little bit around the Occupy movement. Clearly the Occupy movement in London was much weaker than the Occupy movement in the United States. But just the fact of having all sorts of general assemblies, discussions, all the rest of it, did actually raise the idea about how you could begin to organise and point towards the future down there. I think there are problems. I mean, I think there are problems with people who think it's just wonderful we have horizontal organisation. There is hierarchy, and still in hierarchy can often be in horizontal organisation. And I think there's a problem as well, is that I would say that when push comes to the shove, at the end of the day, you look at something like Greece, what's the solution? The solution is revolution. I don't just think horizontal organisation is going to get a revolution in that situation. If you talk about what revolution means, insurrection and all, at the end of the day, actually you're going to have to talk about different forms of organisation and go back further into the working tradition to look at it. But the important thing is a debate is now underway about how we organise and how these struggles get through, and I think that's something to be welcomed.